If you want to be able to have seemingly unlimited godlike powers without having to use a Crimson Bailet or a normal Bailet and therefore having to sacrifice one of your loved ones, then I suggest you hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notifications, that way you're notified when a new video pops up on some of your favorite hiatus-infested series.
Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga, and yes, this is indeed the New World Review, and the individual you heard in the subscribe intro was TheMaskedMan, who we will hear from a bit more later, because we are here to talk about some more Berserk, quite specifically in regards to one of my favorite antagonist groups in all of media, being the God Hand. Now these guys are a very unique set of beings and storytelling, and they evoke a feeling within me that I have rarely found in any other tale. They're the kind of antagonists who command power, terror, and respect almost entirely through the mere act of being. Because the absolutely crazy thing about Berserk is that the God Hand, with the exception of Femto of course, have never really done much in the series. And to compound that, they almost never actually appear in the series either. Yet at the same time, their presence is felt in every panel of every chapter as if it was burned into my mind like a brand of sacrifice on a black swordsman. And the way that Miura has handled this group is nothing short of masterful. I think that a lot of lesser authors would have very much dropped the ball with characters like these because there is a very delicate balance to maintain, especially with the layer of mystery and macabre intrigue associated with them. And that's where the power of these characters comes from. The fact that we've been told that they are more or less the epitome of demonkind and reside on a level of power so great that we as an audience are never really allowed to actually explore it. Instead, we find ourselves acting very much as strugglers alongside Guts, with brief glimpses into a realm that, quite frankly, we may never really have any real comprehension of. And as frustrating as that may sound, those sorts of pieces of lingering intrigue is what leaves a lasting legacy. Finding out too much about them or their abilities, or going even further and say managing to defeat them, would be very much the equivalent of having the technicalities of a magic trick revealed to you. It would be interesting and all, but you will always feel underwhelmed by seeing that trick performed in the future. So in many ways, God Hand works best by knowing as little as possible, because our collective imagination is probably much more powerful than anything Miura could tell us about them on a page. At this point anyway. Now with that said, after all of the praise I've given to the concept of mystery and minimal use, that in and of itself is not quite enough, because we as readers and watchers do indeed need something to latch onto, a piece of connective tissue or a letter of introduction if you will, and Miura does provide that in the form of the latest member of God Hand, being Femto. Griffith and his journey really is the key to everything with this group, because the Golden Age arc more or less provides us with the background and process we need to know regarding how one ascends into a position of power within the Berserk realm. And seeing Griffith's journey to become Femto gives us that solid grounding we need as an audience, because as a human we can strongly identify with Griffith to a certain extent, and that connective tissue carries over into the despairful layer of power that is the God Hand. And not only that, but as interesting as the idea still is, it also almost nullifies the need to find out how the rest of these beings came to be, because we can make the appropriate inferences that over the course of history they were humans, corrupted and ambitious in the same way that Griffith was. And that plays on the imagination, granting endless ideas regarding what kind of person, say, Slan was when she was human. Was she some sort of sadomasochistic queen, like many of history's most notorious female figures? Or is it the exact opposite? Was Slan subject to the cruelty of one of these figures, and over a lifetime of torture did that simply warp her mind to embody the very concept of lust upon her eventual transformation? And that's just the obvious example because Slan maintains more of a human form most of the time anyway. But when you look at beings like, say, Void, and it's just like, what deep recesses of humanity could have possibly spawned something like you? And it's great because as separate as the God Hand are from humanity in terms of power, there is that direct link to them in terms of their origins. They aren't like demons born from a separate race or anything, they're just hyper-evolved humans who have gone down an incredibly dark path. But the thing I love most about God Hand in Berserk is that they don't even need to properly appear to evoke a threatening and sinister response. There have been times in Berserk, like the climax of the Conviction arc, where you just see the very basic forms of the members, and even that is enough to make you go, oh damn, I'm not sure if I want to be here right now. Or even further on in the series where you see a simple page like this, and you just know that this is Void because his design and presence is so distinct that you gaze upon brain matter, and that in and of itself is enough to convey the presence of a God Hand member. And there's also something quite humbling regarding the idea that these entities may not necessarily see an end in this series. As it stands, the power difference between them and any of our protagonists are so out of this world that it would take something like Guts or maybe Casca ascending to the status of God Hand themselves to effectively combat them in any way. But at the same time, that whole idea just doesn't sound very Berserk-like to me. If anything, it feels like this series will end with the conclusion of Guts' story, and the entirety of Berserk will exist as a snapshot of time, which the God Hand exists prior to and following. A tiny glimpse of the world, kind of like human existence in our own reality. But here's something even more terrifying, and it's the fact that the God Hand aren't even the be-all and end-all of existence in this story. Even discounting the events of the Lost Chapter, the God Hand are referred to as the executors of an even greater being, which adds yet another layer of intrigue to this already ridiculously captivating group of antagonists. And to delve a bit deeper into what we actually do know about this group, I have invited YouTuber / Berserkophile TheMaskedMan onto the channel to give some history and his take on the God Hand.
Yo, how's it going everybody? It's TheMaskedMan, and I'm very glad to be here today to talk about my favorite series of all time, Berserk, and more specifically, the big bads of the series, the God Hand. Now, the God Hand are a very interesting bunch considering how mysterious they are within the world of Berserk. Despite them being the major antagonistic force within the world of Berserk, we know close to nothing about them. Just like Calcium Boy the Skull Knight, there's very little known about their past, and most of it is just speculation and theory, with bits and pieces given here and there by different characters throughout different parts of the story. However, due to some of the interactions of the God Hand and the Skull Knight, we do know that Void must have had some connection to the Skull Knight in their past, and it is believed that Void was the first user of the Crimson Bailet. The Crimson Bailet is used apparently every 260 years, therefore the God Hand weren't all created at once, but if not, each was chosen every 260 years in a ceremonial event known as the Eclipse. We see this as characters like Zod at times points to the eclipse is going to happen again, this time referring to the fifth and final member of the God Hand, which ends up being Griffith. And so as for the actual order of all of the God Hand members, again, it's something we don't really know, but from what we do know, we can say that Void was the first chosen and Griffith was the final member chosen of the God Hand. And so outside of Griffith, who ends up becoming Femto, the final member, we don't really know the origins of the other God Hand members or as to who they sacrificed, why they sacrificed, and what their true intentions were. Now, I think that the majority of the group's origins being left a complete secret and unknown to this point is a great thing in the story, given that it seems to add this mysterious factor to them and it makes them a little more creepy. Leaving all of this a mystery really does add another level of intrigue, speculation, and interest to their characters, being that, again, they are the biggest villains so far in the story of Berserk, and I believe the biggest question we usually ask ourselves about a villain in the first place is how did they become a villain? And so Miura leaving that up for speculation, that way we have something to think about during hiatus, is what we call a pro-gamer move. And so the characteristics of the God Hand based on their origin is very difficult to say. However, the characteristics are still on full display while they are God Hand members currently. And so before I get into kind of describing each member of the God Hand and what they've kind of done in the story so far, let me list them out for you real quick. We have Void, Ubik, Slan, Konrad, and Femto. As I said earlier, Void is believed to be the first user of the Crimson Bailet, and he's known to have most connections with the Skull Knight. From what we see of Void's characteristics, he's very good at speaking, and as the Skull Knight says, he does it in a very preaching manner. He definitely seems to be the big brain of the group. Get it? And as for character design, he's definitely the most outstanding member in the group, well, other than Slan, but for completely different reasons, and I think the God Hand as a whole, and more specifically Void it seems, are put into picture perfectly with the iconic quote, "Is the destiny of mankind controlled by some transcendental entity or law? Is it like the hand of God hovering above? At least it is true that man has no control even over his own will." And so as for Void's purpose within the story, along with the rest of the God Hand, is they seem to be key manipulators of the flow of causality. In a way, they're kind of manipulating the course of history for their own benefit, and as for what their final goal or plan is, again, we don't really know. And so Void, along with the next member, Ubik, seem to be the key talkers of the group, doing most of the manipulation as we see towards Griffith's character, leading to his downfall when he becomes Femto. And so as for Ubik, Ubik has the lamest character design of all the God Hand, but again, as I mentioned, him and Void seem to do most of the manipulation. Ubik pointing more towards the emotional sides of the people, that way they give in to using the Bailet, or in Griffith's case, the Crimson Bailet. And if I'm being completely honest, that's probably the most I can really say about Ubik's character. And so for the next member, Konrad is the one we hear speak the least out of all of the members, but from what we see of his abilities, he seems to be really good with diseases and plagues. And so yes, Konrad is responsible for COVID-19. And so now we move on to the most, eye-catching member of the God Hand, Slan. So to kind of describe Slan's characteristics, she is kind of the goddess of this orgy-loving cult, and well, you kind of have to put a masochist, a sadist, and an extremely just we'll say high-driven person together to get the overall feel of how Slan behaves. She has this obsession with Guts' character, and she even seems to find some pleasure when he drives his sword through her. And I'm not using that as a metaphor, like this man put his giant honkin' Dragon Slayer through in between her. Anyways, point is, Slan's character can easily be associated with the word lust. In fact, so much so that the Skull Knight used probably the most sophisticated way of saying the word thought by calling her the Princess Whore of the Uterine Sea. However, we do know because of Slan that the Godhand are able to use physical manifestations in the physical world. However, outside of just physical manifestations, the Godhand are bound to the astral world. Now, ever since the Great Roar of the astral world, where the astral world, which is where the Godhand abides, and the physical world merge, that could very much be different now. And so before I get into the final member of the Godhand, I should probably elaborate on that and expand a little bit, being that again, the Godhand are responsible for a lot of the things that ends up happening within the story of Berserk, by again using some of these physical manifestations and manipulations of people within the physical world to further their plan. And so the biggest example of manipulation and using people in the physical world, this is where we get into the final member of the Godhand, Griffith. Or well, Femto. Now, I really don't want to get into Griffith's character because that could really be its own video, but long story short, and forgive me for simplifying it, but Griffith was somebody who wanted his own kingdom. He's on the road of doing so, he accomplishes great things, and then his best friend leaves, and he sleeps with the princess, gets caught, gets tortured for a year, and now he's a mutilated husk of his former self. And so he falls into despair, and in a last-ditch, desperate attempt to regain his dream again, he sacrifices all of the members of his band, and he rapes Guts' girlfriend Casca in front of his very eyes. In other words, Griffith did nothing wrong. Is a load of crap. However, since he did become the 5th and final member of the Godhand, just like the other members, he was now bound to the astral world. However, through some more manipulation of the Godhand, it was made a possibility for Griffith to be brought back into the physical world through the incarnation ceremony. And so now Griffith is given this new physical body while also keeping all of his Godhand powers, so now he can go and accomplish his dream without any of the human restraints, whether it be physical or emotional, and he does when the Kingdom of Falconia is created. And so as for the Godhand, despite us knowing very little about them, their presence is more than felt within the world of Berserk. The majority of the group being left a mystery is great for speculation, as well as having a character like Griffith, who is now Femto, who is one of the best antagonists ever written, again balances out the group perfectly. And the fact that they make very few appearances within the story of Berserk just adds a more importance to when they actually do appear. And just to add on top of that, they seem to have some incredible abilities, as we see when Femto bends space. And so essentially, in conclusion, the Godhand is one of the most formidable villain forces I've seen in manga, and all of us Berserk fans would love to know the origins of a lot of these members, but if it's left a mystery, I think that also really does play into the story as well.
And there you have it really. Supreme power, supreme mystery, and supreme terror all wrapped into one little neat 5-part package that really, in my opinion, is a huge factor that elevates Berserk beyond the average manga. It's definitely not everything, not even close, but I would personally credit the Godhand as the feature that engrossed me into the series. When I first started reading Berserk an awfully long time ago now, I remember not being too fussed or impressed by the opening chapters, and it really did take something like the summoning of the Godhand to properly open my eyes and engross me into this world. Without those figures present very early on in the series, I'm not actually sure if I would have continued on into the Golden Age arc, or indeed if we began with the Golden Age arc, I'm not sure if I would have been intrigued enough to pursue it, which would have been a great shame, because Berserk in general, Godhand or no, is a superb tale that has this rock-solid group of antagonists with a permanently overbearing presence over all of existence, and that is the kind of glue that binds together the already incredible elements of the manga to me. So to conclude this glorifying fanboyish video, all I have to say is that Miura absolutely nailed this, and these characters will stay with me until quite probably the end of my brief existence on this world. But what do you guys think? Please do leave your thoughts in the comments below, or even join my Discord server. And if you're keen for some more Berserkian content, then please do go and check out some of my other videos, or even subscribe to the channel for hopefully regular brutal Berserk brilliance delivered straight into your YouTube feed. But for now, this has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.